my name is Hans. I'm one of the founders at Conversation Design Institute. So we're the world's largest training and certification institute for conversation designers. So what we help people with is pretty much figuring out, what is conversation design? What does a conversation design department look like? Who's going to be working there? What are they going to be doing all day? And what's the skill set that they need for that? And together with partners from enterprise universities and technology, we try and figure out what a course should look like and how we sort of develop these capabilities at scale. So that's what we do.
Awesome. And Vittorio, you can hear again.
Hey everyone, I'm Vittorio, the co-founder of Bot Society, and Bot Society is a conversation design tool like Sketch or Figma, but for chatbots and voice assistants.
Perfect. And just so everybody knows, like right now we're going to do a super duper deep dive in conversational design. And tomorrow we have a workshop, and it is taught by Hans Van Dam and Vittorio's team. So in the beginning of the class, you're going to learn a lot of theory. You're going to learn a lot of psychology. And at the end of the class, you're actually going to design a bot in Bot Society and have a functioning bot that you can show your boss, or you can take home to your company, or you can implement in your business. And on the third day, you're going to develop it. So I know I shared a link earlier, but I'm going to update that link, and then I'll also email it tonight. So if anyone wants to sign up that hasn't already, we're pretty full in the workshops, but we can have a few more seats. So without further ado, let's jump in. Hans, what would you say are, like, I don't know, the top 3 issues, topics, most important areas that you would say that any conversational designer needs to think about?
I think that probably going to rephrase that question a little bit, but in general, is what we see for a company's perspective, what you want to be thinking about is that a lot of these companies are engineering led, right? And companies would start out and they would put 10 engineers in a room and then wonder why the chatbot doesn't work. So I think what companies need to be thinking about is that if you have a conversation between an artificial brain and a human brain, then technology and psychology should be equally important. And if we want to have conversations sort of where the bot and the human are equal conversational partners, then we want to understand what people say, but we also want people to feel understood. So having that be very important in the organization is crucial. And so everybody on the team then should very much understand that, right? Where that human centricity is key, and how do you build empathy into it. And then, on top of that, as a designer, I guess the most important thing is to understand how complex conversations can be, where you're dealing with an interface where people can say and do whatever they want at any given moment. So how do you get control of that? And empathy is a way of getting control, steering people towards certain things. If people feel understood, they're very happy to follow along with the design that you present. Whereas if they get frustrated, they start talking, they sort of start shouting at you, or just, keep changing their minds, and your bot breaks. So empathy sort of, puts people at ease and helps them, go through the flow. So understanding that dynamic where, understanding your users in, designing for empathy is actually going to create a good chatbot. I think that's sort of I don't know if that was 1, 2, or 3 things what I just said there, but I think those are kind of, and then also know that your bot can't do everything, right? And the examples, if you're a restaurant and people want to book a table for 8 o'clock, a table for 4 at 8 o'clock, that's totally fine. But if they're 13 and 2 of them are in a wheelchair and 2 of them are vegan and 3 of them want a gluten-free meal, they should just give us a call, right? And so your chatbot should not be able to solve everything. So no is always an option to just say, hey, I can't help with this.
Right. I think that you kind of hit on something that we take for granted, and that's like conversational design repair. Like when we talk to each other, even though we know each other so well, there's times when me and Vittorio don't understand each other. And when that happens, I'll say, well, what do you mean? And somehow we forget that, bots are also going to have to repair conversations. Victoria, why don't you share some of what you would consider the biggest topics or areas that we should explore in conversational design?
Yeah, sure. I think like building on what you were mentioning before, like the idea of being able to design dedicated repair interactions where you have kind of like a general fallback that your bot will repeat if it really can't even understand what's the area that the user is talking about. But then with Dialogflow, with Brasa, with basically the technology that is out there, you can also say, okay, what happens if the conversation gets stuck on a specific point, and you can repair for that. And so if you take this technological possibility and you couple it with the empathy principle that Hans was talking about before, then you can come up with very compelling experiences where even if the bot can't handle what the user is saying, or if the bot is not sure about what the user is mentioning, you can still provide an experience that is collaborative in nature. And so where the bot and the bot, even if it's not going exactly right, it can still express a way of being collaborative. I'm saying, for example, like, hey, I'm sorry, I did not understand you there, but I was expecting, a time of the day or something like that. That's just a stupid example. But the underlying idea is that when me and you were talking, we're trying to follow a series of principles that are embedded in our conversation. And one of them is being collaborative with each other. And if we're not collaborating on the conversation, then the person that is not collaborating is the jerk. Right. And you don't want your bot to be the jerk, right? And so being able to design this dedicated repair paths is one of the ways to achieve collaboration and to respect the collaboration principle.
Right. And, this kind of reminds me of, and I forget, there's an actual phrase for it. And it's something like tone, where you can have a passive tone or a direct tone. Not like passive aggressive, but more like passive language versus active language. And maybe, do you guys see a difference in terms of like, is it better if a bot is more using active language versus passive language?
Yeah, I mean, active language in general is more conversational, right? So we are now using active language, and active language, although it is the easiest to speak with active language, writing in an active style is very complicated. So what you see when we get asked a lot to do audits and sort of an expert review for companies that have designed chatbots for voice assistants. One of the first things is that we see is that everything that's passive, we just rewrite to a more active tone of voice, makes it more engaging, and if it's more engaging, it also makes it easier for people to be cooperative. Right. So as soon as people feel like, hey, I'm engaging in conversation, the cooperative principle kicks in, right, where we want to collaborate and we sort of feel a commitment to have a proper conversation. Right. So if your bot has that active language from the get-go, then people feel committed to helping the bot out and they're sort of invested in it. Right. So that active language is actually very important there, because if you sort of have a bot that feels written, then people don't feel any responsibility to be cooperative, and that's a psychological thing that happens there, that people can't switch off. So as soon as we feel that we're talking to someone, you don't want to leave them hanging in a way, right? So if the bot actually has a natural active tone of voice there, then people will feel responsibility to have a successful conversation with it. And therefore, they're also super disappointed then if the bot then doesn't deliver on the functionality, obviously, right?
Yeah, because you gave them such confidence.
Yeah.
It's like telling a really bad joke. You start great and then it just
it just goes flat. Yeah.
It's like, come on. So I think this is a good segue to we have a pretty good idea of like how to think, what are the bigger topics in it. But what would you say are, when a company is first starting to do a conversational AI internally, what are like some of the things that they should think about? And then what are some common mistakes that happen regularly? And I think you hit on some of them, like using passive language, not considering empathy, and so on. But, like, imagine a client's come to you and they say, Hans, we want to do a conversational AI. Where should they get started? What's a good framework to think about it?
Yeah, so obviously, it starts with use case selection. If you're starting out, take something that has, impact, but doesn't get too complicated. It's in terms of integration and functionality. So keep it simple, but make sure you do something that is actually valuable in that regard. One of the mistakes that companies then make is just start building it and start designing and writing. What we like to do is actually, so for all these use cases, once you've identified the use case, and you pretty much, you are a business, you look at the conversation that you're going to be having, then you look at, who are we going to be having these conversations with? So that's sort of, your user personas. Most companies have research on that. And then, who is going to be having these conversations on our behalf, which becomes your bot personality, right? No matter how small the project is, you still need to think about your bot personality. It doesn't mean that you have to spend, 2 months figuring out all the details of it, but who is it, right? Is it, how old is he or she? Where are they from? What do they look like? What do they sound like? How do they speak, right? Because trust is so important in conversation design, and trust comes from having a consistent tone of voice, right? Where it makes sense to the user and what they're trying to solve, and to the brand that they're interacting with. So you want to have that bot persona. So once you have established that, then you can do it very quickly. And we have some canvases for it that we'll use tomorrow as well in the workshop. Then the key thing is to use, so we have a conversation design canvas, and there's 2 sides pretty much on it. There's the user needs and the bot needs. The way we look at it, if you have a conversation, the user, they want to achieve something. They want to have certain information, but what motivates them? What are their anxieties around their topics? What do they actually expect from this experience? What is everything that we know about them? And again, this is something that you can spend, 6 months on doing the research, or you can actually, hey, I'm an insurance company and we're doing a use case where their phone got stolen and they want to see if they can get a new one. You can figure it out pretty quickly as well, right? But you sort of want to get an understanding of the user side. Then from the bot's perspective, we have to look at, all right, in order to help this customer, what's the information that I need? What are questions that I need to ask? What's the information that I might already have because they're logged in? Is there certain limitations, certain functionality, certain things that I must say from a legal point of view? So we want to sort of understand the conversation from their perspective. Once we have that, we move into exercise of sample dialogue, and it's pretty much improvisational theater. So what happens, you sit 2 people back to back from each other. One person sort of plays the user and the other person plays the bot. And, we don't want them to be able to see each other because we want them to just use words when they're doing this, right? And then, they get into character and they have the conversation. In the beginning, it's super awkward and terrible, but they will iterate and they will get better. And every time the user sort of asks a question to the bot, you have to think like, hey, is this something that more people would want to know? So if I say, these shoes are going to look great on you, but how much are they? It's an annoying question to have to ask, and you're probably, all right, that's what more people would want to know. So that's probably something the bots should proactively say already, right? These shoes are going to look great on you. They're $100. Everybody has them, right? So by doing this exercise and by just speaking out freely, you're going to understand which information is required at which stage of the conversation. And this is what empathy is, right? Understanding, which information to give at which moment so that the user feels understood and is comfortable engaging with you. So for whatever use case you have, you want to do this exercise, this role-playing thing. Once you have that, you start sort of structuring the conversation, right? So this gives you an understanding of what it is and sort of the happy flow. And then, what we do then is a Wizard of Oz test, right? And this is still with Post-its on the wall usually, where we sort of have the prompts on the wall for the happy conversation. Then we just bring in people, about 5 to 10, and we sort of let them speak freely, and we just answer what we've written on our Post-its. And now we'll very quickly identify, if that was actually, if that works. And you'll very quickly, understand how many things people can say and that the design doesn't work and that you need to go back to the drawing board and stuff and figure it out that way. But you'll very quickly come to a conversation that is going to work. And then you start, using tools like Bot Society to finalize that design, to make it work, to test it even more, to finish up the copy and then do the export to Rasa. So I think that's like key, this exercise of understanding, the user and the bot's perspective, doing the role playing and validating it very quickly. That helps you get that initial use case live. And then I think, what more companies, particularly if the scope of your bot's limited, you also want to have personality content in there already. So a lot of companies see personality content as an add-on. It's like, oh yeah, small talk and a silly joke and blah, blah, blah. We don't need that now because we want to get value. But actually, if you're very limited in scope, it helps to have that, because if it helps build a relationship with the users. And once you have a relationship with the users, they'll be more forgiving for when the bot fails. Right. So if your scope is limited, you might actually want to have some personality content to just create a richer experience altogether. So I think this little package, if you're starting out, do these steps for one use case, and then that should get you off your feet very quickly, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, that was very beautifully said. I mean, you created a diagram in my mind. So now I'm wondering, Vittorio, how often do you see companies follow this sort of approach, where they come on Bot Society and they actually, I think you're muted, by the way.
Yeah, so we see that more and more, I think, thanks to, the amazing work that and other folks in the industry are doing. From the Bot Society perspective, when you arrive to Bot Society, you probably already have figured out a couple of things. Like Hans was saying, you probably went through a sketch or a whiteboard already, because Bot Society is of course not a whiteboard. Like you want, as a designer, there's the whiteboard moment, and nobody's ever gonna take that away from you. But we see folks doing that more and more, and I think it's just a testament of like how the industry and the space has evolved in terms of thinking about the design process of a conversational interface. I think one of the things that is still very hard to do, especially to coordinate on, is decide what not to do in your first project.
Okay.
So because one of the difficult things, and just to build on top of what Hans was saying, which by the way, I think he needs to reconnect, once you decided, okay, this is my main use case, right? And so you define this kind of general direction or objective that you want to do. It may be useful to also decide what you don't want to do, at least in this first version of the bot. And the reason is that it's going to help you, Hans is back, it's going to help you make sure that everyone in the organization, but also you when you're designing, like, you're not going to stray off course, and you're going to keep your bot there. Because what happens is, the moment that a bot is out, like, it's there's going to be expectations around that may not be exactly your use case. But it's difficult to do 5-4 things at once, and it's not only difficult like from a practical point of view, it's also harder for the users, right? So like, and it's harder to get the right data from the user if your bot is not focused. And so the more your bot is focused, at least in its first iteration, the easier it is to refine it. Because you will get information, and the added bonus, just to say that I agree with Hans there, is that you also have some more space to do the personality traits and the chit chat, and to answer some questions that users always ask to bots, like who built you and that kind of stuff. That helps build the trust that you need, as Hans was saying. But also, it's opportunity cost. So like if you decide to do just one thing very well, then you have the opportunity of doing that too.
I see.
Actually, so what you said on the touch of Vittorio, where you sort of, it becomes better if you have the limited scope, and it becomes better to take the data and optimize on top of it. I think what a lot of companies are not aware of enough is that if you have empathy in the design and really understand what people, what's in their minds and what they want to achieve, if they feel understood, they'll follow along, and you're going to be asking them very simple binary questions, right? It's like, okay, so this is what's going on, and this is what you're trying to achieve. Yes, okay, let me help you. And then you ask them a bunch of questions and you guide them through the process. Once you have used empathy and really understood that intent, all the questions you're going to be asking are very simple. So what that means is that the data that you're going to get from all those interactions is actually very basic, right? So a lot of companies, what they do is they have no empathy. That creates frustrated people. And then we have a field day analyzing the data of all those frustrated people. And we iterate based on top of that. But if you actually understand the psychology, you can ask, you can take control of the conversation, and also take more control of the data that you're going to collect from what your users are saying. And I think a lot of people could actually gain a lot of value from understanding that principle better.
I see. So bad design equals bad data.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way.
So. And that may be a trap, right? It's the same way that, like, if you badly design a website, I'm talking for the graphical designers out there, right? You may say, I'm just gonna pick it up. You may say like, oh, nobody's clicking on our button, nobody wants to buy this product, but actually, like, the landing page is badly designed, and people, I don't know, like the button is above the code, and so people don't see it, and so you may take the wrong impression from the Google Analytics data. It's not different from us, and I think the industry is arriving to the point to realize that. But I think at first, since it looked like it was more a mathematical machine learning only thing, people approached it in the same way that they approach like a CRM database data, right? Where like you take a look, okay, how many customers we have in this vertical. But it's not the same thing when you have an interface that is producing data, because the data is going to be determined by your design.
Right.
So,
yeah. So I want to, before we fully jump into this, I want to ask, maybe you guys have a couple of suggestions on the best way to determine on the front end what should be in scope and what should be out of scope, and how much of a scope is enough and how much is too much.
Yeah. That's a great point. I'm curious to know what Hans thinks about it. I just want to say something that I think we've not seen a lot, and I would like to see more. And so, which is thinking about the context. So building on top of what Hans was saying, one of the exercises they have is two people talking with each other without looking at each other, right? Back to back. Yeah. And the reason why you want to do that is, especially if you're talking to an Italian like me, like my hands are going to say stuff. And you want to eliminate that, right? You want to eliminate the context of a human-to-human conversation to get better data. But what you could also take away from that exercise is that context is very important in conversations, right? So if I ask you the same question, what do you want? If I'm behind a counter or if I'm in the middle of the road, you're going to take it very differently. But it's the same question, right? And so when you're building this artificial conversations, there's still going to be context. So one of the ways that we're really trying to encourage our users to think about using Bot Society, and I hope you can feel it if you use the product, is that when you're designing, you need to really think about the context of the conversation. And I mean that in a big way. So for example, think about the user journey as a trajectory that started before your bot. So what happened before the conversation started? What are the expectations there? what is the context that is appearing and what is the objective of the user. And that usually, in my experience at least, kind of clarifies and helps you define the scope, because you want to take that context and that journey into consideration even before they click or they start to talk. And that's, from a user point of view, it's more important than, say, this is happening on an IVR or on a web app. Okay? And so I think that I found that as a general principle to be useful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, now listen, because I'm intrigued by what you're saying. I totally forgot what the initial question was, really, because it's interesting, because I'm sort of want to tap into that. But what was the initial question again?
So the initial question, Hans, is how much is a good amount of scope and how much is too much and how much is too little? So, for example, like, you don't want to go into Rasa or Dialogflow and just have one intent or one context, right? Because then everything looks like that one thing to Rasa or the NLP system. But then you don't want to start with 100 either, because 100 is just, you'll be there for 6 months. So what's a good number of use cases or situations in which the bot would help a person to start with?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky question. Like, what we see is a lot of, there's so many companies approach it in a different way. Sometimes they'll have like one very specific problem that needs to be solved. And it's just like, hey, we actually, if we can get people on our login page and they're not logging in, they're dropping out, and then they pick up the phone, maybe we can use a chatbot here to solve the specific thing when people try to log in, and it helps them do that, right? And then that's something that just delivers so much value there that's like an initial project, and then they get excited about doing more. So what you see, if you look at like the service space, what we see, most companies will have like their top 10, 20 journeys that they just want to cover with a chatbot. And sometimes that's already too much, right? Before, just 10 simple FAQ or 10 simple FAQs can become very complex conversations. So it's very, I guess it's very difficult to put a number or to sort of think about that in terms of scope. What you said earlier, that Vittoria, what I was intrigued by a little bit is like, if you look at like channels, for us, what we try to think about most now, and that's usually what I tell clients, like, I don't care too much about your chatbot or your voice assistant, but you're going to be using AI to talk to people, right? And that's a big deal, and that's what we're happy to help you with. So what we try to get people to do is to design voice first, right? To think about it, you're just having a technology-driven conversation. You design it voice first, and then you can leverage it on any interface you want, right? So if you want to put it in your IVR, your call center, you want to use it in your customer service chat, you want to use it on WhatsApp, and Amazon, Google, doesn't really matter. Once you figure it out, what the core journeys around your company are, and you just start figuring out those conversations, right? Then it just, you can deploy them anyway. You can do it everywhere. And I think a lot of companies are stuck with, like, they'll have like 100 FAQs. Sometimes it's actually just 5 conversations, right? Because a lot of times they give a poor answer, and that poor answer just triggers a new question, right? And therefore things start adding up, right? So sometimes it's actually there's actually fewer intents and journeys than companies believe, and sometimes there's many more. So I guess in terms of selecting scope, really, have more like an ideation project there. Do a little sprint to figure out actually what it is we're talking about. Because sometimes companies will call us and it's like, hey, can you help us out for a day? And it turns out it's a 6-month project, and the other way around as well, where they've been working on something for 2 years and we figure it out in a day, right? So I guess that's sort of the important thing there that we stumble upon. There's no one size fits all, but it is, I guess, the one thing that would work for everybody is to think more fundamentally about what you're actually doing. And it is just, figuring out your key journeys and designing conversations for them.
And Hans, when you think about what you're designing and these journeys that you speak of, Are you thinking of like the customer journey of like
Yeah.
the first time to interact with your brand and so on, marketing, customer service, follow up?
Yeah, so usually like most companies have lots of information on this and research that they've done, right? So they don't know exactly what kind of customer, what kind of triggers they have to.
Is the end moving? Like if you move your ends too much, the compression algorithm goes crazy. That's why you
Okay.
have a very stable connection because I want to be able to move my hand. But yeah, I think I agree with Hans there. Like
Yeah.
The idea of being able to like take a step back and look at the whole ideation phase is very important. And it's not totally connected to the platform. The experience ends up on like once you have that stuff defined, then you can apply it on a lot of different platforms.
Yeah.
It's back.
And yes, and let's jump into something that I think that everyone will find far more interesting. I know I do, and I think these three topics we touched on them briefly, but I think it's important. At least I think of them as interconnected, and that is small talk, personality, and then getting data. Right.
Yeah.
So, and then the conventional wisdom that we hear, and you can correct if it's wrong, because a lot of times conventional wisdom is wrong, is that you don't always want to have personality in your bot, especially if it's something task related. Like you're talking to the Bank of America bot, and you're like, why is there $1,000 missing out of my account? And the bot's like, hey, I hope you're having a great day.
Yeah, we all know those, right
now.
Yeah, no, you don't want to do that though. No, so there's persona, and persona is really the character of your bot, right? And it doesn't matter how boring or transactional, functional your bot is. You want to develop a persona to have a consistent tone of voice. That is an already important distinction. Now, so we sort of looked at, if you look at conversations that are in the service space, and it usually means that somebody has a problem and they have an intrinsic motivation to reach out to you. That means you don't have to motivate them. All you have to do is actually facilitate whatever they're after, right? And keep it very simple and straightforward. So you don't want to goof around with that, right? You just want to help these people. But now at the end of the day, if somebody, I don't know what you said about Bank of America, lost a credit card or whatever, if you saw, or is it money missing out of my account? Now, once you've helped them out, because that's what companies now want. All right, so we've done the service. Usually when people talk to a customer on the phone and they've done something service related, they try to get them into a sales conversation. Now, how do you get a chatbot from a service dialogue that you have completed into a now more sales journey, right? And that's where personality can be incredibly helpful then, right? So, all right, happy to help you out, by the way, and then have a little chat about whatever and lead them into that next conversation. So then that is sort of where, so even their personality content can be incredibly helpful even. But yeah, you never want to like, hey, my car broke down, want to hear a joke? Like that's, then you're completely missing the point. And I think a lot of times companies are using personality to camouflage bad design. And so figure out what it is that's actually going on, solve the problem, and then try to increase motivation and whatever you're after. Sometimes it's brand engagement, sometimes it's sales, and you can leverage personality to do all of those things.
Right. So it is a good way to think about it like this. One, people are always going to assume personality, even if there isn't one.
Yeah.
So imagine what situation the bot is in, right? And what a person from your company, your ideal employee, how they would respond personality-wise to that situation.
Yeah.
Is that a good approximation?
Yeah, that is actually, if you work at the counter and somebody has a big problem, what you're going to do is actually see, hey, okay, I get you. I'm going to solve this problem. And then once you've resolved this, like, well, that wasn't too bad, was it? And you sort of, you clear the air, and then you can talk about something else. Yeah, that's, I guess, what your ideal customer would be. But I think you sort of touch on the important point there. It's like, what would the real life conversation be, right? And that's why you need to do the role playing to figure out what the real life conversation would be. And once you figure that out, then there's a lot of craftsmanship to make sure that that can actually happen in that very limited interface of a chatbot or a voice assistant, right? But yeah, how would we talk about this, and how would we resolve this, and then what's, how do we craft that into something elegant?
Right. And yeah, I think that's the beautiful part about what we're doing. Earlier, you said that you want to do this for voice first, and I know someone in the audience asked what that means, and I think it's really important to differentiate between a voice interface that has UI components and a voice interface that doesn't have UI components. So voice first would be a UI that there is no UI, kind of like Google Voice or Alexa.
Yeah.
And the value there is that it's kind of like when you're using voice, it's the equivalency of someone calling you on the phone and you picking it up and you not knowing who's on the other end and you not really knowing what the context is. So the conversation has to guide the conversation instead of the UI guiding the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to actually take away everything they have where it's just voice. It's just actually just the dialogue that is going to solve the problem, right? And that's how you want to design it. And then, you look where you're going to deploy it per interface. You look at, what are the UI components, and if you're going to be using a voice assistant, there's designing voice first is just really the dialogue. And then if you're going to use a voice assistant, well, you use air cons, you use sonic branding, you add all these cool things, and then you add some chips. If you're doing a multimodality, you add some cards. If you're using a chatbot, you add some pictures. Knock yourself out with whatever the real estate has to offer for that particular interface. But the core is design with the absolute bare minimum, because only then you are forcing yourself to really dive deeper and better understand of what's actually going on. What's the pain and the problem behind the question, or or just the reason of reaching out. So you're forcing yourself to better understand your customers.
Right. And one of the other insights I had a long time ago when I was designing a conversation for it was like a banking fintech company. And that was like, as you're turning around backwards and you're both speaking it literally, does the conversation resolve the issue? And how does it make that other person feel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So before we jump, I guess I want to jump into one other area real quick, and that is small talk and getting data from customers. Because I think these two, maybe Vittorio can share, like, how often do you see companies leveraging small talk in their design in order to get data? Or is this like a new concept?
So data that they can use for business purposes, like demographic data.
Yeah, because
okay.
What's that? You got it.
It's an interesting concept. I would need to think about that. So what I've seen for sure is that small talk is considered sometimes too much a nice to have.
Okay.
And the data that it generates, it's considered only in the realm of, are we getting the user back on, the main track? So I think there may be potential in using it somehow differently. At the same time, maybe I'm biased because we work with a lot of companies who have strict data regulations. So they cannot really, like the old financial sector or the health sector, they really can't, just take any data that they want without the user being 100% on board. And that kind of limits. So maybe I'm biased about that. So yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Hans?
Yeah, I mean it's tricky with these things, right? So like we um so we have about like 60 different copywriting principles
Okay.
to that come from psychology that we can apply very effectively to sort of guide people towards desired behavior, right?
Yeah.
And we know exactly how to make people feel comfortable and motivated to give us actually certain information, and we use some of these in like surveys and stuff, where there's companies that want to get some information that way. You have these long forms that are nobody really likes to answer them because they always say they only last 3 minutes, but you end up clicking 20 minutes. So how can we use conversation design to make that easier and collect data that
Yeah.
way? We apply it there, and I could definitely see a very unethical ways of doing this and getting
Right.
certain data that you might want.
Right.
But it's not something that we engage in, and I think if somebody would actually like focus too much on that, it's not going to happen.
Mhm.
People wouldn't appreciate it too much. But if you look at like, I guess a
Mhm.
product review is in a way also gathering data, right? So we do a lot of that, right? You would buy a product and you get like a terrible form. It's like, did you like it? Would you recommend it? In those situations, conversational interfaces are key. And because you ask a question and somebody want to leave a review, no. Are you sure? You can pretty much ask the same question a bunch of times and get data that way. So I think it's very effective in
Yeah.
using sort of chat, being chatty and collecting information that way. It's also something that it's a thin line, I guess, that we shouldn't cross too much.
I can give you an example that how we used it. It was in a bot that gathered people's interests, and then it would surface them data, or in this case, it was like um, encyclopedia that serviced those interests. And it was a company, Nat Geo, National Geographic, and they were coming out with their like next generation encyclopedia, and they wanted to know like what's the most best way to sell it, right? And so now people came into the bot, they played around with the bot, and the bot was essentially a game where the bot would ask you what your interests are, and it would have like a bunch of small talk dialogues with you. And let's say that one of these small talk dialogues with you it would like ask you what type of quiz you wanted to take, and maybe you took like the polar bear quiz or you took a geography quiz, right? And the assumption is that you're not going to take a quiz about something you don't care about.
Yeah.
And if you do a good job, you probably know about it and you're interested, And through these games and through these small talk conversations, we were able to like figure out that this user really liked polar bears. And then when the encyclopedia went live, what we did was we would say, hey, here's the part of the encyclopedia that features polar bears, and we would share a bunch of those encyclopedia entries, and that would get them interested, and maybe they would buy the encyclopedia. Another very natural example of this is like, imagine that you're using like Google Voice and you're asking questions about Tom Brady, right? Or Tom Cruise, or Tom Hanks, right?
Lots of Toms.
Chances are that you're probably like interested in these Toms, and maybe the next time Tom Hanks has a movie or Tom Brady plays in the Super Bowl, maybe you're interested in it, right? And now Google Voice sends you, hey, Stefan, Tom Cruise has, I can't think of any movies off the top of my head, but hey, he's got a new movie launching. Would you like to see the trailer, right? So I think in this way, it's almost unavoidable because everything you do is communicating.
Yeah. No, I definitely see like use cases there that people would be interested in exploring that. But if you look at, sometimes you hate it when you sort of click on one little thing on Instagram, and the next 5 months you're spammed with ads from that company.
Yeah.
like I will put in extra effort to not buy from that company anymore, right? So there's the technical feasibility of it and the sort of the business use case, but then there's also, how are people responding to it, and is it going to last over time? So it becomes a very elegant design issue. So that is interesting to sort of find the right balance in it, I guess.
Yeah. So let's get a few more comments or questions from the audience. If you guys see anything you want to answer, just jump in. And if you're in the audience, you want to ask a question. There's
lots of stuff on the data.
Yeah.
I like that. Like, how do you handle accidentally getting sensitive data? It's a good question, and it is so some of these chatbot platforms actually sort of mask sensitive data immediately, right? So that it gets filtered out. Other than that, you will have AI trainers. So we train people for 3 roles: conversational copywriters, conversation designers, and AI trainers. So these are people that turn data into understanding pretty much and deploy and optimize the chatbots. So they will go through data and they will they'll label utterances and see how to optimize the model. So if they catch something, they pretty much just throw it out in a way as well. So those are things. And I've also seen some bots where it was if it was identified that it pretty much you can write a prompt like, hey, you're sending something that you probably don't want to do, like you say don't send your credit card details, and then if somebody puts in a bunch of numbers, it's like, hey, that does not look right, be careful there. So there's ways of doing that. And on top of that, on the other side, because what I sort of foresee is that if we move to like level 3 AI assistants, where they become more contextual, personal, transactional, that means that we're going to ask more from people, right? And we sort of need to build more trust into the system. Security and trust both become more important once these conversations become more personalized. And that means that we just need to create an environment for people to, at least know what they're talking to, very clearly understand that they're talking to an AI system, and that there's, how is my data being handled? And every chatbot should have answers to those questions, like, hey, what are you doing with my data? How is that organized? Is this secure? How do I know if it's secure? How do I know that the answer that I'm getting is actually the right answer? So we sort of call that like an ethical scope, sort of, like part of the scope, like ethical dialogues around, the data sensitivity around these chatbots. As they get more advanced, trust and security become bigger issues, and you should actually design proper dialogues just for the sole purpose of educating your users on that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to build on top of that, I think that you can do all of this stuff I agree on, and a lot of technologies allows you to like scan for personal identifying information and stuff like that. But I think from a designer point of view, you can also do stuff. I think that the biggest thing that you can do is not train users to give you sensitive data in the chat, right? So, and more or less, I think every user will do that. So like, don't ask them for a password in the chat. Like, try to come up with some sort of, okay, now you will put the password in. This is a secure form kind of thing. Even if it's, back in the back end, it may be the same encryption technology because you're encrypting everything, but you want to give an experience that it's clearly a more secure one for passwords. And, if you need stuff like social security number or health information, like give them a safer space from a user experience point of view, so that you train your user base to expect that every time they express sensitive information, so they won't give you sensitive information in places where you cannot handle it properly. And I think we have seen this, a lot of our users do that really well. The folks at Cushion.ai, the folks at USSF, which is a health institution here in San Francisco. So that, because you want to have important conversations, and some of them involve personal identifiable information and health information, and you want to have automated conversation about this stuff, but you need to kind of like create the safe field experience. And I think if you do that from the design, from the get-go, then you will see that your engineers will have to scrap away a lot less data down the well, because the users are not happy to share sensitive information in a way that it's not what you expect. Like, it's a mutual objective not to get there, right? It's not like every time you open the app with a bot, you will write your social security number and then say hello, right? Like, that's not going to happen. So if you manage to train your users there, you're going to get to a much better place.
Perfect. So I think that's a good place to end the conversation.